Noelle never wanted to be a hero. She was just a quiet girl, lost in her world of programming. But when she uncovered evidence that could save an innocent man, she had to speak up, and instantly became the one being hunted. Justice was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, and every step Noelle took only led her deeper into a web of danger and betrayal. Maybe the truth wasn't always worth the cost. Rain tapped lightly against the roof, mingling with the rhythmic clatter of keyboard strokes in the dimly lit room. The soft glow of the computer screen cast a bluish hue across Noelle Harper's face, reflecting the sharp focus in her eyes. At 17, Noelle was different from other teenagers. No parties, no social media, no need for the noise of the world. She preferred to keep to herself, burying her thoughts in lines of code rather than conversations. On her screen, a complex program ran, but her attention had already drifted elsewhere. A small news window played in the corner. Today, the district court formally indicted Andre Bennett, 38, for armed bank robbery. Authorities arrested the suspect based on surveillance footage captured at the scene. If convicted, Bennett faces a minimum sentence of 25 years in prison. The screen flickered, switching to the grainy footage. A tall man, clad in a black hoodie, entered the bank. He pulled the hood lower, reached into his jacket, and drew a gun, pointing it at the terrified teller. The entire scene lasted only seconds before he fled with a bag of cash. The final frame showed Andre Bennett being tackled by police outside his home. Noelle was about to close the window and return to her work, but something made her pause. Her brows furrowed as she replayed the footage. Something was off. She slowed it down, again, then again, and suddenly she saw it. Noelle wasn't a detective, but she was a genius when it came to data analysis and image processing. She had spent countless hours studying computer vision algorithms, just out of curiosity. But this wasn't curiosity. This was something more. She pulled up her forensic analysis software, fed the footage into the system, and ran a frame-by-frame scan. Minutes later, there was an anomaly so small that the human eye would never catch it. A minuscule distortion, right at the edge of the suspect's hood. Noelle's fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-checking pixel consistency and lighting distribution. Within moments, her software confirmed what her instincts had told her. The video had been tampered with. A chill ran down her spine. Why? Who had altered it? Was Andre Bennett truly guilty? Or had someone doctored the footage to frame him? Noelle compiled her findings into a detailed report. She couldn't ignore this. She had to get the truth out. First, she emailed Andre Bennett's attorney, attaching the analysis. 1 hour passed. No response. She sent the report to several investigative journalists. Nothing. Anxious, she picked up her phone and dialed the lawyer's office directly. I reviewed the surveillance footage. It's been altered. You need to take a second look. The voice on the other end sighed, exasperated. Miss, I don't know who you are, but don't insert yourself into this case. The evidence is clear, but I have proof. If you just... Do you think you know more than the forensic team? I can't waste time on this. The line went dead. Noelle stared at her phone, heart pounding. They didn't believe her. They wouldn't even look at the evidence. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, staring at the screen, replaying the footage, the numbers, the data. Everything screaming the same truth. She could walk away. Forget about it. Go back to being just another girl with a talent for coding. Or she could fight, because if she was right, an innocent man was about to spend the rest of his life behind bars. But she was only 17. No one listened to her. No one cared. Noelle leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. And then a memory surfaced. She was 8 years old. She had seen a friend get blamed for something he hadn't done. She had known the truth, but she had stayed silent, thinking her voice wouldn't matter. No one had stood up for him. No one. She opened her eyes. This time, she wouldn't stay silent. This time, she wouldn't wait for permission. No more emails. No more unanswered calls. Noelle Harper was going to expose the truth. On her own. The rain hadn't stopped completely. Droplets slid from the rooftop, tracing long, winding paths down the window pane. Noelle Harper sat motionless at her desk, eyes fixed on her computer screen. She had sent emails. No one responded. She had made calls. No one believed her. She had tried to reason with the system, but the system refused to listen. With a quiet sigh, she closed her laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut echoed in the darkened room, a hollow, final sound. Something heavy tightened in her chest. Not fear, frustration. Was she delusional? Was there a chance she was wrong? No. She knew what she had seen. The evidence was right there. Data didn't lie. But if no one listened, if the truth was ignored, then it might as well be meaningless. Noelle shut her eyes, and a memory resurfaced. She had been 9 years old. A boy in her class, Jared, had been accused of stealing money from the teacher's desk. No one believed his innocence. No one stood up for him. But Noelle had seen who had taken the money. She could have spoken up. She could have told the truth. But she hadn't. She had been afraid. Afraid of attention. Afraid of being ridiculed. Afraid of being wrong. Jared was suspended. Shortly after, he transferred schools. She never saw him again. Noelle's eyes snapped open. This time, she wouldn't stay silent. She glanced at the clock. 9:27 a.m. Andre Bennett's trial began at 11 a.m. If the lawyers wouldn't listen, if the media didn't care, she had one option left. She had to go there herself. A plan without a plan. The courthouse was a 40-minute subway ride from her house. She could make it. But then what? Security wouldn't just let a 17-year-old walk into a criminal trial. If she tried to force her way in, they'd throw her out before she could say a word. She needed a different approach. She didn't have to be inside the courtroom. She just needed to be heard. If she could find a way to reach the judge, the prosecutor, someone before the trial ended, someone with the power to review her findings, maybe, just maybe, she could change something. She didn't need everyone to believe her. She just needed one person to listen. A goodbye without answers. Noelle made her way downstairs. In the kitchen, her mother, Noelle Harper, was preparing breakfast, one hand wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, the other scrolling through the morning news on her phone. "Mom, I need to go downtown today." Elise glanced up, frowning. "For what?" Noelle hesitated. If she told the truth, her mother would never let her go. "Just a school project." Elise narrowed her eyes. "What kind of project requires you to go alone?" Noelle met her gaze. There was concern there, but there was also something else. Something Noelle had seen in her mother's eyes countless times. Resignation. A lifetime of knowing that justice didn't always win. A lifetime of being told to be careful. Because people like them, black people, couldn't afford mistakes. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll be back before dark." Elise studied her for a long moment. "Noelle, are you sure you're okay?" Noelle nodded. She wasn't sure, but she knew she couldn't stand still anymore. A clock counting down. At 10:15 a.m., Noelle left the house. Every step down the sidewalk felt heavier than the last. But she didn't turn back. She boarded the subway, took a seat in the corner, put her headphones, didn't play any music. Her thoughts wouldn't stop racing. What am I doing? What if security stops me? What if I'm wrong? But another voice inside her whispered back. What if you're right? What if Andre Bennett is innocent? If you don't do something, who will? The subway rumbled past station after station. The air was thick, suffocating. A man across from her yawned. A young woman scrolled through her phone. No one knew that, in Noelle's mind, the entire world was tilting on its axis. But she didn't stop. She wouldn't let herself stop. The courthouse. 10:52 a.m. Noelle stepped off the subway and onto the courthouse steps. The building loomed above her, massive stone columns stretching toward the gray sky. Outside, journalists crowded together, microphones in hand. Lawyers hurried inside. Police officers guarded the entrance. Noelle swallowed hard. She had no access pass, no legal authority. All she had was the truth. But the truth meant nothing if no one would listen. She took a deep breath, and then she stepped forward. The air inside the courtroom was suffocating, heavy like an invisible wall pressing down on everyone inside. The wooden benches were packed with spectators. At the front, Judge Edwin Montgomery sat high on the bench, his sharp eyes scanning the room with authority. Across from him, Prosecutor Richard Lawson stood poised, gripping his case files, ready to close this trial for good. On the other side, Andre Bennett sat in the defendant's chair, wrists cuffed, his posture firm, but his eyes betrayed a quiet desperation. In the back, Noelle Harper weaved through the rows of seats, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs. She had no legal standing, no permission to be here, but none of that mattered anymore, because if she didn't speak now, there would be no second chance. Judge Montgomery's deep voice echoed through the courtroom. The jury has deliberated all the evidence and testimonies. Before I pass my sentence, does the defendant have any final words? Andre Bennett stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, I didn't do this. I've said it 100 times. I didn't rob that bank. Lawson smirked, shaking his head. Mr. Bennett, the security footage clearly shows you pulling a gun on a bank teller. Cameras don't lie. Andre opened his mouth to protest, but another voice cut through the silence. Not loud, but firm. People can lie. Every head in the courtroom turned. Noelle stood there, small, young, out of place in a sea of power. But she didn't back down. Who is that? Someone whispered. What is she doing here? Lawson frowned, annoyance flashing across his face. Excuse me, but who are you? This is a courtroom, not a high school debate club. Noelle swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the folder in her hands. But her voice held steady. My name is Noelle Harper, and I'm here because I have evidence proving Andre Bennett is innocent. A murmur spread through the room. Judge Montgomery's eyes narrowed slightly. Miss Harper, this is not an open hearing. You have no standing to present evidence here. Noelle stepped forward. Your Honor, please listen to me. The surveillance footage was tampered with. I can prove it. Lawson let out a dry laugh. And who exactly do you think you are? The footage has been analyzed by forensic experts. You really believe you found something they missed? A ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom. A 17-year-old challenging the criminal justice system? Ridiculous. Judge Montgomery banged his gavel, silencing the room. He turned back to Noelle, irritation lacing his tone. Miss Harper, I will say this once. You do not have the authority to present evidence in this trial. I am ordering you to leave this courtroom immediately. Two security officers began moving toward her. Noelle's palms were slick with sweat. They were going to drag her out. She was going to lose her only chance. She tightened her grip on her backpack, took a deep breath, and said the one thing that could make them listen. Your Honor, if you believe that a video is infallible evidence, then consider this. Videos can be altered. But raw data never lies. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Montgomery's expression shifted. Explain. This was her moment. I analyzed the surveillance footage. There are inconsistencies, proof that it has been manipulated. If you give me 5 minutes, I can show you. Lawson crossed his arms, still smirking. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Noelle unzipped her backpack and pulled out a laptop. I can restore the original data. Right here, right now. All eyes were on her now. And this time, no one was laughing. Judge Montgomery studied her carefully. Then, after a long pause, he turned to the prosecutor, then back to Noelle. Finally, he spoke. Miss Harper, I hope you understand that if this is nonsense, you will be held accountable for obstructing justice. Noelle met his gaze without flinching. I understand, but I'm not wrong. Montgomery exhaled, then nodded. Fine, you have 5 minutes. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Noelle had won her first battle, but the real fight was just beginning. Noelle pulled out her laptop, exhaling slowly as she typed rapidly. The courtroom's large screen flickered to life, displaying the dark blue interface of an advanced image analysis program. Across the room, Prosecutor Richard Lawson folded his arms, shaking his head. Let me guess, he said, voice laced with condescension. You're about to expose some grand conspiracy? A teenager claiming to have found what an entire forensic team missed. Noelle ignored him. She focused on her process. Step 1. Load the surveillance footage. Step 2. Run the frame-by-frame data scan. Step 3. Detect inconsistencies. Lines of code scrolled rapidly across the screen. Pixels were analyzed. Algorithms dissected every frame. Seconds later, the scan was complete, and the results sent a chill down Noelle's spine. Not because she doubted herself, but because the truth was undeniable. She zoomed in on a specific section of the screen and turned to Judge Montgomery. "Your Honor, I'm going to play this video in slow motion." Every eye in the room remained glued to the screen. The footage played. A tall man in a black hoodie entered the bank. He pulled his hood lower. He drew a gun, threatening the terrified teller. He grabbed stacks of cash and ran. It looked the same as before. But then Noelle activated light spectrum analysis. The screen glitched. The courtroom collectively gasped. Lawson's smirk vanished. "As you can see," Noelle said evenly, "there is an inconsistency in the suspect's hood." She pointed at a slight distortion in the fabric, so minuscule it was invisible to the naked eye. "This texture is artificially manipulated. If I adjust the contrast..." She entered a command. The screen shifted. The mask of altered pixels peeled away. And then, the real face beneath the hood emerged. A white man, brown-haired, a faint scar along his jawline. The real bank robber, not Andre Bennett. The courtroom erupts. Gasps echoed through the chamber. A juror's mouth fell open. Lawson stiffened, his jaw clenched. Judge Montgomery narrowed his eyes. Noelle turned back to the court, her voice unwavering. "This footage was doctored to make the suspect resemble Andre Bennett. But data doesn't lie. When we strip away the alterations, we see the real perpetrator." She played the original, unaltered footage. Andre Bennett never appeared in the video. Shock rippled through the courtroom. Lawson's face turned red. He tried to regain control. This could be a data glitch, a software malfunction. This girl manipulated the footage right in front of us. Noelle let out a quiet laugh. "I can rerun the analysis from scratch. Right now, in front of everyone." She turned toward him. "But instead of accusing me, maybe you should ask, who submitted this fake evidence?" The words landed like a hammer blow. A new, chilling truth had surfaced. If the footage was fabricated, someone had framed Andre Bennett. And Richard Lawson had used that false evidence to put an innocent man behind bars. The realization sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Noelle exhaled, steadying herself. She had done it. She had proven the truth. She had saved Andre Bennett. But then, the courtroom doors slammed open. Police officers flooded inside. Chaos erupted. People turned in confusion. For a split second, Noelle thought they were here to arrest the real criminal. But then, a uniformed officer pointed directly at her. "Noelle Harper, you are under arrest for unauthorized access to government data." Time seemed to stop. Gasps of horror filled the room. "What the hell is happening?" a journalist shouted. "Why are they arresting her? She just proved the video was fake." Andre Bennett stared in disbelief. Judge Montgomery's gaze darkened, and then Noelle turned, just in time to see Richard Lawson smirking. A slow, knowing smirk. He had expected this, and suddenly she understood. She had exposed the truth, and now they were coming for her. Her victory had lasted only seconds. Chaos exploded through the courtroom. People whispered in frantic tones. Cameras flashed as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. The jury exchanged bewildered glances. At the center of it all, Andre Bennett sat frozen in his chair, eyes wide with disbelief. Minutes ago, Noelle Harper had saved him, unraveling a conspiracy in front of the entire court. Now, she was the one being taken away. Noelle stood paralyzed as two officers advanced toward her, hands resting on their holsters as if she were some kind of dangerous criminal. One of them spoke, his voice firm and unwavering. "Noelle Harper, you are under arrest for unauthorized access to government data and the unlawful retrieval of classified information." "Hands up." Noelle inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. "I didn't do anything wrong. I only exposed the truth." The officer didn't flinch. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "This is insane. I just proved an innocent man was framed," Noelle protested. Across the room, Prosecutor Richard Lawson folded his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. "The law is the law, kid. You can't expose the truth all you want, but that doesn't mean you're above it." Noelle clenched her fists. This wasn't coincidence. The timing was too perfect. The moment she revealed the truth, they had swooped in to silence her. Someone had ordered this, not because she was guilty, but because they needed her gone. As the officer stepped closer, Noelle turned her gaze toward Judge Edwin Montgomery. He sat high on the bench, hands clasped together, his expression unreadable. Noelle didn't beg. She didn't plead. She just needed to know. Did he believe her? Montgomery met her eyes. His face remained cold and impassive, but something had shifted. Gone was the indifference he had shown when she first stepped into the courtroom. Gone was the dismissiveness of a man who didn't care about the truth. For the first time, Noelle saw hesitation, consideration. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't move to stop the arrest. Instead, he gave the smallest, slowest nod. Then, in a voice of quiet authority, he spoke. The officers have the right to carry out this arrest. However, this trial is not yet concluded. I am ordering a delay in sentencing until the newly presented evidence can be fully examined. The courtroom erupted once more. Gasps, whispers, shouting. Noelle blinked. He just bought time. Montgomery wasn't taking a side, but he also wasn't letting them sweep this under the rug. The cold bite of handcuffs. Click. The metal cuffs snapped around Noelle's wrists. She bit the inside of her cheek, refusing to let the fear show. This wasn't the end. She had done what was right. She had proven the truth. The question was the truth enough to win? As the officers pulled her toward the exit, she lifted her chin, refusing to be dragged away in silence. She turned her gaze to Richard Lawson, the man who had smirked through it all, the man who hadn't been surprised when she was arrested, because he had known. He had been waiting for this. The courtroom doors were closing behind her, but Noelle couldn't let herself disappear without one last word. She shouted, her voice echoing through the chamber. Judge Montgomery, you know I'm right. They're trying to bury the truth. Don't let them cover this up. Silence fell over the courtroom. All eyes turned to Montgomery. He didn't speak. He didn't move, but his grip on the desk tightened. He heard her. The heavy doors slammed shut. The courthouse hallway was cold and unwelcoming. The officers shoved Noelle toward the waiting police car, the metal cuffs digging into her skin. She climbed inside, the door slamming behind her. The engine rumbled to life. Through the window, she could see the gray, endless sky, heavy with unshed rain. It felt as if the entire city was holding its breath. And in that moment, Noelle knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't over. The game had only just begun. The police car door slammed shut, sending a dull, heavy vibration through the metal frame. Noelle Harper stared through the small window as the vehicle pulled away from the courthouse. She could still see their faces, bystanders frozen in shock, journalists scrambling to capture the moment, jurors exchanging looks of confusion. But there was one face that wasn't surprised. Prosecutor Richard Lawson, standing at the courthouse steps, hands tucked into his pockets, his ever-present smirk lingering like a shadow. He had known this would happen. He had orchestrated it. The car turned into a narrow alley, leading to Central Precinct, a cold, lifeless building of aged concrete and steel. No sunlight reached inside. Only the dull hum of fluorescent lights, the sharp clank of metal, and the suffocating air of confinement. Noelle was led through a long hallway. Not a single officer spoke to her. She was placed in a small interrogation room, a metal table, 2 chairs, and nothing else. The cuffs tightened around her wrists as they secured her to the table. Noelle kept her back straight, eyes steady. She couldn't let them see fear. She wouldn't let them win that easily. The door creaked open. A middle-aged officer strode in, tossing a file onto the table. Noelle Harper, 17 years old, honor student, no criminal record. He pulled out a chair, settling in, arms crossed. Now tell me, how does a high school girl hack into government systems? Noelle didn't blink. I wasn't hacking. I was finding the truth. The officer let out a dry chuckle. Truth? You think you're Sherlock Holmes? His voice hardened. We know you didn't do this alone. Who helped you? Noelle clenched her fists. No one. You're lying. The officer leaned forward, his gaze sharp and probing. I don't believe for a second that a teenager breached a federal firewall, accessed classified evidence, and reconstructed manipulated footage, alone. He placed his palms flat on the table, voice dropping. Who's behind you? A hacker? A whistleblower? A group? Are you their scapegoat? Noelle stayed silent. Because the truth was, she really had done it alone. No accomplices, no organizations pulling the strings. Just her, a laptop, and the undeniable knowledge that Andre Bennett was innocent. But no one was going to believe that. The officer sighed, standing up. You don't want to talk? Fine. But make no mistake, Noelle Harper, you're not walking out of here anytime soon. He turned for the door. But before he could leave, a new voice entered the room. I'll take it from here. Richard Lawson stepped inside. Impeccably dressed, movements slow, deliberate. The officer gave him a nod before exiting, leaving Noelle alone with the most dangerous man in the room. Lawson slid into the chair across from her, hands folded on the table. He watched her, not with anger, not with frustration, but with amusement, like a predator who had just cornered his prey. Noelle Harper. He repeated her name, testing its weight, letting it settle. Noelle said nothing. Lawson tilted his head, his smirk never wavering. I'll admit, kid, you've got guts. He let out a low chuckle. But you made one crucial mistake. Noelle narrowed her eyes. Lawson leaned in, voice dropping to a near whisper. You're just a pawn, and a pawn can't take down the entire board. The room seemed to shrink. A cold chill ran down Noelle's spine. Not out of fear, but because she finally understood. Lawson wasn't just a prosecutor. He knew. He hadn't been shocked when the footage was exposed. He hadn't panicked when the case unraveled, because he had been waiting for this moment. Noelle's pulse pounded in her ears, but her voice stayed steady. If I'm just a pawn, why are you here? Lawson let out a soft laugh. He straightened, adjusted his tie, then leaned close, so close that his breath ghosted against her skin. Because I hate pawns that don't know their place. Then, just as smoothly as he entered, he stood and walked toward the door, leaving her in the cold silence of the room. The lock clicked behind him. Noelle sat there, heart hammering. Everything had just shifted. This wasn't just about clearing Andre Bennett's name. This wasn't just about a single manipulated video. She had stumbled into something much bigger, something dangerous. And now, they wanted her silenced, permanently. The room was too quiet. Noelle sat still, wrists cuffed to the metal table, the dim overhead light casting long shadows against the cold, gray walls. She had lost track of time. An hour? 2? Richard Lawson had left long ago, but his words still echoed in her mind. You're just a pawn. A pawn can't take down the entire board. Noelle clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. She didn't know what would happen next. Then the door creaked open. But it wasn't a police officer who entered. It was Judge Edwin Montgomery, the judge's gamble. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. He didn't sit right away. His sharp gaze swept the room as if assessing the battlefield, before he slowly pulled out a chair and took a seat across from her. His presence was unlike anyone else she had faced. He didn't sneer like Lawson. He didn't glare with hostility like the officers. But there was no sympathy in his eyes, either. Only calculation. Montgomery clasped his hands together, tilting his head slightly as he studied her. I imagine you didn't expect things to go this far. Noelle didn't answer right away. She met his gaze. This was the same judge who had dismissed her before. The same man who had treated her as nothing more than a reckless teenager. But now, something had changed. That absolute certainty in his eyes was gone. Something inside him had shifted. Noelle leaned forward slightly, voice steady and sharp. You didn't come here just to say that, did you? Montgomery narrowed his eyes. No, I came to understand something. He leaned back, still watching her carefully. You're not a lawyer. You're not an investigator. You're not a forensic expert. You had no reason to involve yourself in this case. His voice dropped lower. So why did you? Noelle didn't flinch. Because I know Andre Bennett is innocent. Montgomery exhaled, as if he had expected that answer. Knowing something is one thing. Risking everything for it is another. He studied her for a moment. Then his expression darkened. You could have been killed. If someone wanted to keep the truth buried, you realize what that means, don't you? Noelle was silent. Then she took a slow, deep breath. So tell me this, Your Honor. If I end up dead, wouldn't that only prove how badly someone wanted to keep this truth hidden? A flicker of something passed through Montgomery's eyes. Not anger, recognition. For the first time, he understood Noelle wasn't reckless. She knew exactly what she was doing. Montgomery sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You've made me rethink some things, Miss Harper. Like what? Noelle's voice didn't waver. A long pause. Then, the judge leaned back, arms crossed. When I was younger, I believed justice was absolute. Noelle listened closely. But after years on the bench, I learned something else. Justice doesn't always win. His gaze turned sharp, cutting like a blade. And I hate admitting that. Noelle clenched her fists under the table. He wasn't lying. For the first time, she saw something different in him. Not apathy, but frustration. At the system, at himself. Maybe Montgomery had ignored injustices in the past. Maybe he had looked away when the truth was inconvenient. But today, he had seen the proof. Today, he couldn't pretend justice was working as it should. The judge closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he opened them, his decision clear. I can't absolve you, Noelle Harper. Noelle held her breath. But I also can't imprison you. A game-changing decision. Her eyes widened. Montgomery stood, adjusting his robe. I'm ordering your immediate release. She sat frozen. But don't mistake this for a victory. He cut her off, voice firm. I will call for a reinvestigation into Andre Bennett's case. But don't get cocky. He turned to face her fully, his gaze sharper than ever. You've stepped into a world you can't control now. The people behind this won't just let you walk away. And next time, there may be no one left to save you. A heavy silence settled between them. Noelle didn't speak right away. She just looked at him, deep and unflinching, committing every word to memory. Then slowly, she nodded. I know. Montgomery's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered again. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. The officers will escort you out. Don't do anything reckless. The door swung open. Light from the hallway spilled in, cutting through the dimness of the interrogation room. Noelle inhaled deeply. Her fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The police station door shut behind Noelle with a hollow thud, leaving the suffocating air of bureaucracy and cold steel walls in her wake. Outside, the sky was still a shade of heavy gray, pressing down like an omen. She wasn't free. She had just escaped one trap only to walk into a bigger one. Montgomery's final words still echoed in her mind. The people behind this won't let you go. She knew that. And the most terrifying part was, they had probably already started moving. Noelle had barely taken 3 steps down the courthouse stairs when her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She hesitated for a second, then answered. Noelle Harper. A voice low, measured, unhurried, came through the line. Congratulations. You just made yourself a target. Noelle's breath hitched for half a second. Who is this? The man didn't answer immediately. There was a faint sigh, like someone debating how much to say. Then, in a slow, deliberate tone, he said, I'm Agent Scott Turner. I work for an organization you don't need to know about yet. But I know you. I know Andre Bennett. And I know exactly what you just did. A chill spread through Noelle's chest. What do you want? Turner's voice remained even. It's not about what I want. It's about what you need to hear. Andre Bennett's case is just the tip of the iceberg. Noelle froze. Her fingers curled tighter around the phone. Do you have proof? A quiet chuckle. Kid, do you think I'd be calling you if I didn't? Her pulse pounded against her ribs. Turner's tone shifted, losing any trace of amusement. There's a network manipulating the justice system. They're not just framing one innocent man. They control police, prosecutors, even judges. Noelle's grip on her phone tightened. Lawson, he's just a pawn. Turner responded instantly. A loyal one, but not the mastermind. The air seemed to thin. A part of her had already suspected this. But hearing it confirmed, knowing the rot ran so much deeper, it sent a cold wave through her. Then who is? A pause. Then, in a voice as steady as a blade, Turner said, a senator. Noelle stopped breathing for a second. A senator? That meant this wasn't just about a fabricated bank robbery case. This was about power, politics, a level of influence that was completely out of her depth. "Who?" She forced the word out. Turner exhaled. "Not yet," he said, "but I sent you something." A notification popped up on her phone. An email. No sender. Subject, confidential file. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tapped it open. Within seconds, her stomach dropped. The file contained bank records, hidden transactions, offshore accounts, evidence of massive financial fraud. But none of that was what made Noelle's blood run cold. It was the name at the top of the list. Senator William Alderman, one of the most powerful men in the country. Turner's voice cut through the silence. Bennett was just a scapegoat. The people above him are covering up a money laundering operation that spans multiple states. And Alderman? He's not the only one involved. Noelle couldn't speak. This was bigger than anything she had imagined. She had stumbled into a war. And now, she was standing in the crosshairs. Before she could even process it, Turner spoke one last time. "Listen to me, Noelle. Be careful, because from now on, they'll be coming for you." The call ended. The weight of his warning settled over her like a lead blanket. A sharp, uneasy feeling crawled up her spine. Something was wrong. She glanced up, and then she saw it. Across the street, amidst the moving crowd, a black SUV. Parked, tinted windows, no visible occupants. But she knew. She could feel the eyes on her. Noelle turned swiftly, forcing herself to walk away, keeping her pace controlled. Not running, not panicking. But inside, her mind was racing. She had made herself a target, and now someone wanted her silenced. For good. But there was one thing she knew for sure. She couldn't stop now, because she had seen the truth. And if she didn't act, no one else would. The night air was cold and suffocating. Noelle walked fast, head down, fingers gripping the straps of her backpack. Every nerve in her body was on edge. She wasn't alone. Someone was following her. She had sensed it the moment she left the police station. At first, it was just a vague feeling, a glimpse of movement in the reflection of a glass door, the subtle shadow of a car tailing her just a little too perfectly. But when she changed direction 3 times, first down a main street, then cutting through a narrow alley, then weaving through the back of a convenience store, the black SUV was still there. This wasn't coincidence. They were hunting her. Noelle's heart pounded harder. She picked up her pace. The street ahead was too empty, unnaturally so. It felt orchestrated, as if someone had ensured no witnesses would be around. She caught a glimpse of a store window, using the reflection to check behind her. 4 men stepped out of the SUV. They weren't in uniforms. No badges, no ski masks. Just men in dark suits and long coats, dressed like any other corporate professionals. But something about them was wrong. Their steps were too synchronized, too sure. They weren't running. They didn't have to. They knew Noelle had seen them, and they didn't care. She clenched her jaw. She couldn't let them catch her. She ran. Footsteps thundered behind her. They were chasing her now. Noelle cut into a side alley, vaulting over a metal fence, knocking over garbage cans to slow them down. It didn't work. They didn't panic. They didn't even seem frustrated, because they knew something she didn't. They knew she had nowhere to run. She couldn't go home. She couldn't call the police. She couldn't trust anyone. She only had herself. The trap snapped shut. She burst onto a main street, cars flying past in a blur of headlights. Pedestrians moved along the sidewalks, oblivious. They wouldn't grab her here. Not in front of so many people, right? She was wrong. A black sedan screeched to a stop in front of her, blocking her path. The back door swung open. Noelle skidded to a halt. Inside, a man in a dark coat stared at her. "Get in, now." Noelle's hands tightened around her backpack, ready to bolt. "If you don't, they'll reach you in 10 seconds. She froze. The man wasn't armed. He wasn't shouting. His voice was calm, but with an edge of urgency. And more importantly, he wasn't one of them. Could she trust him? She had no time to decide. The footsteps behind her were closing in. Noelle jumped into the car. The door slammed shut. Tires screeched against asphalt as the car peeled away. The name she knew. Noelle sat rigid, chest rising, and falling rapidly. The city lights flickered past as the car sped through the streets. She turned to the man beside her. Late 40s or early 50s. Sharp jawline, streaks of gray in his dark hair. A faint scar ran from his chin to his cheek. He exuded control, the kind of presence that made people listen without question. Noelle narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" The man was silent for a moment. Then, in a steady voice, he said, "Scott Turner." Her blood ran cold. "Agent Scott Turner?" He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the road. "I told you to be careful. You didn't listen." Noelle exhaled sharply. "I didn't think they'd move this fast." Turner glanced at her, his voice low and measured. "You don't understand what you're up against, Noelle. These men aren't cops. They aren't common criminals. They're trained to eliminate problems quietly." A chill crawled up Noelle's spine. Turner's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "You stepped into something much bigger than you realize. And if you're not careful," he finally looked at her, "you'll disappear, and no one will even know it happened." The weight of his words settled over her like a stone. For the first time since this started, real fear sank its claws into her. She had been so focused on proving the truth. She hadn't stopped to consider what the truth might cost her. "There's no going back." Noelle steadied her breath. "What do I do?" Turner's eyes narrowed. "First, you disappear. They know your name, your face. They will track your every move. We need to get out of here. Now." Noelle turned to the window. The neon glow of the city blurred past, streaks of red and gold reflecting in the glass. She had escaped this time, but she knew this was just the beginning. Her enemies weren't just men in dark suits. They were a network, a machine of power that had operated in the shadows for years. And they had one goal now: erase Noelle Harper. But Noelle clenched her fists. They weren't the only ones who wouldn't stop. The car sped through the streets of New York, weaving past flickering streetlights. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. Noelle glanced at the man beside her, Agent Scott Turner. He remained focused on the road, driving with the kind of calm precision that came from experience. This wasn't his first chase, but it was hers. She took a deep breath, forcing her heartbeat to steady. "Where are we going?" Turner kept his eyes ahead, his voice steady and low. "Somewhere safe. You'll need a place to work, won't you?" Noelle nodded. She needed a computer, internet access, and a quiet space to put the pieces together. And she didn't have much time. 15 minutes later, Turner pulled into an abandoned parking lot in Brooklyn, stopping in front of an old brick building. No cameras, no pedestrians, no witnesses. Turner locked the door behind them. "This is one of my safe houses. No one knows about it." Inside, the apartment was simple but functional. A wooden table, a row of chairs, multiple computer monitors in the corner, a filing cabinet, and a small fold-out bed. Noelle set down her backpack, her eyes scanning the room for one thing. "Where's the computer?" Turner smirked, stepping over to a cabinet. He pulled out a sleek, unbranded black laptop and placed it on the table. "It's mine, but something tells me you need it more than I do." Noelle wasted no time. She grabbed the laptop, sat down, and started typing. Lines of code filled the screen. She activated multiple security protocols, encrypting her connection. "I need access to government data. I have to find the proof." Turner crossed his arms, watching over her shoulder. "You really think you can do that without getting caught?" Noelle smirked, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "If they catch me, then I don't deserve the title of a genius hacker." The monitor filled with cascading lines of data as Noelle bypassed firewalls, rerouted signals, and dug deep into the Justice Department's classified files. A few minutes later, she found something unusual: a hidden, encrypted folder. No authorized access, except for a handful of names. The first name on the list flashed on the screen: William Alderman. Noelle's stomach tightened. She quickly decrypted the folder, revealing a series of classified financial transactions. Hundreds of millions of dollars moving between offshore accounts and shell corporations. Everything was disguised beneath layers of legal business dealings. Money laundering, corruption, a cover-up at the highest level. Noelle's fingers hovered over the keyboard, a cold shiver running down her spine. She clicked on an audio file. A voice crackled to life. I don't care if Bennett is guilty or not. We need someone to take the fall, so the media stops digging. Noelle's breath hitched. The man continued. We can't let anyone dig deeper into this. If necessary, eliminate any loose ends. Turner clenched his fists. It's him. Noelle turned to look at him, her voice steady but firm. Yes, William Alderman. Silence filled the room. Noelle stared at the screen. She had found it. The undeniable proof that Andre Bennett was framed. That the real criminals weren't just hiding. They were running the system itself. Turner exhaled sharply and turned to face her. You've gone too far, Noelle. She knew that, but she wasn't stopping now. We need to expose this. Noelle's voice was stronger than ever. Turner studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. We need a plan? Noelle inhaled deeply, feeling a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had uncovered part of the truth. Now, she had to make sure the world saw it. The room was silent. Noelle stared at the screen, her hands clenched into fists. The decrypted files lay before her, exposing the dark underbelly of corruption stretching from the Justice Department all the way to Congress. Senator William Alderman wasn't just involved in Andre Bennett's case. He controlled an entire financial laundering network. Bennett was just a pawn, a name chosen to take the fall, to distract the public from the hundreds of millions of dollars being funneled through shell corporations. Noelle's jaw tightened. They couldn't keep this buried forever. Turner exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. We can't take this to the police. No one in the system can be trusted. Noelle nodded. She already knew that. They couldn't send the evidence to the FBI because the FBI had people inside the network. They couldn't give it to the press because half the major news outlets were bought and paid for. There was only one way to expose the truth. Noelle lifted her head, her voice steady. We go public. We do it in front of the entire country. Turner narrowed his eyes, studying her carefully. Do you have a plan? Noelle took a breath, her eyes gleaming. Yes, and it has to happen tomorrow night. The target, a national conference. She pulled up a news article, turning the screen toward Turner. National Political Conference. Senator Alderman to speak live. The event would be broadcast nationwide, with hundreds of reporters and millions of viewers watching. It was the perfect opportunity. Turner stared at the screen, deep in thought. You're saying we broadcast the evidence live during Alderman's speech? Noelle nodded. We'll project the audio recording, the financial records, everything, right onto the main screen. She paused, then added, no one can silence us if the truth is playing in front of the entire nation. Turner didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, suddenly, he let out a quiet laugh and shook his head. That's an insane plan. Noelle shrugged. I've never been a fan of boring ones. Turner sighed, but there was something different in his expression now. Respect. He gave a small nod. All right, let's get to work. Noelle immediately dove into the conference's security system, bypassing firewalls and mapping out their broadcasting network. If she could plant a single device in the control room, she could hijack the main feed and force the truth onto the screen, live. But she had only one shot. If she failed, there would be no second chance. As Noelle worked, Turner's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face darkened. They know. Noelle's stomach twisted. What? Turner slammed his phone onto the table, pulling up a news alert. Breaking news. Noelle Harper, wanted for national security breach. Her photo flashed across the screen, next to a fabricated report labeling her as a dangerous hacker attempting to compromise government systems. They had set her up first. Noelle felt ice crawl down her spine. She wasn't just a target anymore. She was being hunted. Turner's voice dropped, sharp and cold. We're out of time. If they know what we're planning, they won't just sit back. Noelle clenched her fists, feeling her heartbeat pounding in her ears. They're going to try and kill me before I can do anything. Turner gave a grim nod. Exactly. Noelle looked up at him, fearless. Then we have to act now. Before they do. Outside the building, a black SUV rolled to a stop in the shadows. A man in a dark suit stepped out, pressing an earpiece closer. His voice was calm, emotionless. Target acquired. Moving in. Inside, Noelle was still unaware. She was about to make the biggest move of her life. But the people coming for her were faster than she realized. The price of truth was always steep, and Noelle Harper was about to pay in full. The auditorium glowed with brilliance, a sea of powerful figures from the heart of American politics. Lawmakers, corporate giants, high-profile journalists, all gathered here tonight. On the massive LED screen behind the stage, an extravagant montage played, glorifying the leadership and achievements of Senator William Alderman. He was moments away from stepping onto the stage, and Noelle Harper was standing right in the middle of it all. She kept her head low, weaving through the crowd in a simple black dress, blending in as just another event staff member. One mission, that was all she had. Plug the USB drive into the control system, unlock the broadcast feed, and expose Alderman's corruption to millions of people. In her earpiece, Turner's voice crackled. "Are you inside the control center yet?" Noelle murmured under her breath. "Almost." The control room was just to the left of the stage. 2 technicians worked inside, with 1 security guard posted outside. She needed to get in, but how? Noelle inhaled deeply, then pulled out her phone and fired off a short text. 5 seconds later, a fake system alert flashed across the technician's monitors. Police car light broadcast error. Check fiber connection immediately. Police car light. The 2 men panicked and rushed out of the room to investigate. Now there was only one obstacle left. The security guard. Noelle approached him, clutching a stack of papers with a frazzled, anxious expression. "I need access to update Senator Alderman's speech file. He wants it uploaded immediately." The guard frowned. "I wasn't notified about this." Noelle sighed in exasperation, shifting on her feet. "Damn it, if I don't update the speech in time, the teleprompter will be wrong. Do you really want to be responsible for that?" The guard hesitated. Then, with an irritated grunt, he muttered, "Make it quick." 3 minutes. The door clicked open. Noelle stepped inside, heart hammering in her chest. She moved fast, locating the main server, plugging in the USB drive. The files began uploading. She glanced at the monitor. Full control secured. One press of a button, and the world would see the truth. But then, the door behind her swung open. Another security officer entered, his eyes locking onto Noelle instantly. "What are you doing?" Noelle froze. Her mind raced. "Think. Fast." She forced a nervous laugh. I'm updating Alderman's speech files." The officer narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "I don't recall any orders about this." She couldn't be caught now. Noelle took a silent breath and hit another command. "Police car light system error. Live feed disrupted police car light." The warning flashed red across the control panel. The officer jerked his head toward the screen, distracted for just a second. And that was all she needed. Noelle slipped out the door. "Hey, stop." The officer bolted after her. Noelle ran, down the hallway, past the stage exits, into a dimly lit service corridor. Her pulse pounded like a drum. On stage, Senator Alderman strode forward, his politician smile perfectly in place. The room roared with applause. He had no idea. Noelle sprinted toward the technical area. 5 seconds. She spotted Turner in the distance, creating a diversion to keep more guards from noticing her. For seconds, she pulled out her phone, opening the remote activation app. 3 seconds. Her finger hovered over the button. 2 seconds. She inhaled sharply. 1 second. Click. The screen behind Alderman glitched. The crowd's clapping faltered. Then, bam! The LED display flickered, then changed. Gone were the carefully scripted campaign slogans. Instead, the classified documents appeared. Bank statements, offshore accounts, wire transfers worth millions. The room fell deathly silent. And then, a voice recording played. Alderman's voice. Loud, clear, undeniable. "I don't care if Bennett is guilty or not. We need someone to take the fall and kill the media attention." Gasps rippled through the audience. Shock, confusion, panic. Alderman's face turned ashen. He turned to look at the screen, his crimes laid bare before the entire nation. No escape. Noelle watched from the shadows. She had won, but she also knew this was only the beginning. The silence inside the auditorium shattered. The applause that had once roared for Senator William Alderman had turned into chaotic whispers, gasps of disbelief. Thousands of eyes locked onto the massive LED screen, where the darkest secrets of one of the nation's most powerful politicians were now exposed. On stage, Alderman stood frozen. Lines of data cascaded across the screen. Offshore bank accounts, money laundering transactions, incriminating audio recordings, and then his own voice. "We can't let anyone dig deeper into this. If necessary, eliminate the ones who ask too many questions." The words echoed through the stunned auditorium. A puppet master brought down. Alderman took an unsteady step backward, his face drained of color. "No, this isn't possible." He whipped around, barking at his security detail. "Shut it down, now!" But it was too late. Cameras had turned. The world was watching. The truth was out. Bam! The main doors burst open. FBI agents stormed into the auditorium, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding. A lead agent stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Senator William Alderman, you are under arrest for corruption, money laundering, and abuse of power." Alderman stumbled backward, eyes wild with panic. But no one moved to help him. His security detail, once unwaveringly loyal, turned away. The very people who had once protected him now abandoned him. The cold metal of handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Alderman thrashed, shouted, his voice raw with desperation. But there was no escape. He had ruled from the top for years, and now his empire was crumbling beneath him. Just before the agents dragged him away, Alderman's gaze landed on her. Noelle Harper, standing at the edge of the chaos. The girl who had brought him down. A slow, dangerous smirk crept onto his face. And then, in a low whisper, meant only for her, "You have no idea what you just stepped into. This isn't over." Noelle held his gaze. She didn't flinch. She understood. Alderman was just one head of the serpent. The real monster, the system that created him, was still very much alive. As the FBI led Alderman away, Noelle stepped out of the building, breathing in the cool night air. For the first time in weeks, the sky above her felt open. Turner approached, hands in his pockets, a small smirk on his face. "You just made history, Noelle." She looked out toward the city skyline, a sea of lights flickering in the dark. She had changed everything, but she knew this wasn't the end. Truth was never just one layer deep. She had cut off one snake's head, but the rest of the nest was still lurking in the shadows. And if they wanted to silence her, she would only speak louder. Noelle Harper was no longer just a nameless hacker. She had become a symbol of the truth. Noelle's battle is far from over. If she could take down a corrupt power, can she survive against even greater forces? Don't miss the next chapter. The truth behind the curtain is even more terrifying than you think. Comment your thoughts and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories.